My dear, I'm in the middle of a very good book. Can't it wait?
No, this is important. You must act right away.
Is the barn on fire? If not, I can think of nothing else.
The future of our daughters is at stake. Please listen. This is no time to be burying yourself in a book. You are always reading books.
I enjoy intelligent company, and none finer is to be found than in my books.
You must think of our daughters. Unless we can get them married, and married well, what is to become of them? Jane is nearly 23 and still not married. She's as good looking as I was when I was her age, but far too diffident for her own good. If only she would make an effort to catch a husband, she could have any one of her choosing. And as for the other four, no suitors as of yet, who would want them? Lydia's far too wayward and fickle, and Kitty too, too giddy and thinking only of her pleasures.
Kitty and Lydia are young. Of course they are foolish.
Oh, they are no more foolish than I was when I was their age.
No, I wouldn't argue with that.
Mary is a more rational girl, of course, but never lifts her eyes from her books.
And unfortunately is too stupid to learn from what she reads.
And as for Elizabeth, she's far too independent and outspoken. No man would tolerate her impudence.
I will have nothing said against my Lizzie. She is worth more than all the rest put together.
Mr. Bennet, you must not say such things. You take such delight in vexing me. No compassion for my poor nerves.
Simply not true, my dear. I have the highest compassion for your nerves. They are my dearest friends. You have had them mentioned to me every day for 20 years, at least.
You do not know how I suffer. When you die, everything we own goes to that dreadful Mr. Collins, and then where shall we be? If only we'd a son, then our estate would have passed on to him and we'd be all right.
Well, you would insist on having 5 daughters in a row.
I did my best. Providence had just chosen to be improvident in our case. Anyway, did you hear that Netherfield Park is to be let at last?
You wish to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it.
My dear, you must have heard that Lady Lucas said it is to be let to a young man from the north of England. A Mr. Bingley is his name. Think of that. A young Englishman with a grand wealth of £5,000. A wonderful thing for one of our daughters.
How so? How could it affect them?
How can you be so tiresome, Mr. Bennet? Of course you understand I plan to marry one of them off.
Oh, what a horrid practice. Jane does so keep me at it. I'm exhausted.
Does your head ache, Mamma?
Of course, my head aches, my dear. Cannot seem to convince your father to pay Mr. Bingley a visit, so it seems we shall never know him.
Oh, but you forget, Mamma, that we shall meet him tomorrow at the assembly, and Lady Lucas has promised to introduce us.
Lady Lucas will do no such thing. She's a selfish, hypocritical woman, though I have no opinion of... Stop coughing, Lydia. You have no compassion for my poor nerves.
Lydia has no discretion in her coughing.
I do not cough for my own amusement, Papa. Jane, when is the next ball?
Tomorrow fortnight.
So it is. And Lady Lucas does not return until the evening before, so she will not have had a chance to introduce herself to Mr. Bingley. Oh, how brilliant. But I am sick of talking about Mr. Bingley.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, as I have just made the visit myself yesterday morning. I expect we'll be getting a call very shortly.
Oh, you really have called upon him. Oh, I am pleased. And I'd always thought you loved your daughters far too much to part from them, but I really, really am pleased.
I'm off to the library now. Lydia, you may cough as much as you please.
What a wonderful father you girls have. I don't know how we'll ever be able to repay him for this. Oh dear, so soon.
Hello, Miss Bennet. I'm Mr. Bingley, your new neighbour at Netherfield. Mr. Bennet so kindly called upon me and invited me to call upon the ladies of this house.
I'm delighted to meet you, Mr. Bingley. These are my daughters, Elizabeth, Kitty, Jane, Mary, and Lydia. Please do be seated. Mr. Bennet is currently occupied. I hope Netherfield is proving large enough and that you do not quit it in a hurry.
Everything I do is done in a hurry. Therefore, if I should resolve to quit Netherfield, I should be off in 5 minutes. However, at present time, I find myself quite fixed here.
It is pleasant to have Netherfield open once more, but you must miss London.
When I'm in the town, I never wish to leave it. When I'm in the country, it is quite the same. Both have their advantages, and I'm equally happy in either. However, there's some fine estates about. Can you see Sir Luke's estate from the garden?
Yes, there's a fine view of the chimney from the terrace. He is one of our nearest and dearest neighbours, such an agreeable man.
Yes, the surrounding countryside is very charming, Miss Bennet.
We certainly think so. But you must have a ball at Netherfield sometime.
I've already decided upon it. When my friend Mr. Darcy and Mrs. Caroline Bingley arrive, I shall send out my cards.
That is vastly good of you, Mr. Bingley.
I look forward to it. I really want to be off. Goodbye, ladies.
Well, going so soon. Well, goodbye, Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Bennet, how nice it is to make you and your family's acquaintance once more. I've heard much of the charm of your daughters. Happy to see that I've not been misled. Shall we be introduced?
I'm sure my family are delighted to make your acquaintance. Again. Mr. Bingley, I believe you've met my wife, my dear Mr. Bingley.
How delighted I am to meet you again, Mr. Bingley. I hope you were comfortably settled at Netherfield.
I liked it enormously. Such a pleasant environment, such pleasant neighbours. Let me introduce you to my sister Caroline Bingley, my good friend Miss Fitzwilliam Darcy. Miss Bennet, I have the pleasure of the next dance.
Charming young man Mr. Bingley is. And his friend is quite handsome too. They're a little distant, I thought.
Yes, he was much the same when I called upon him yesterday morning.
Why didn't you tell me you'd visited him again?
It must have slipped my mind. I made the visit yesterday morning.
But why didn't you take us with you?
I wanted to get a measure of Mr. Bingley without any distraction from overly curious females.
Well, what did you make of him?
He seems a very pleasant young man, and very wealthy too.
What a brilliant opportunity.
Come, Darcy. You can't stand there alone all night. Miss you dance.
You know how I detest dancing, unless it's with someone who I'm properly acquainted with. Besides, you're dancing with the only handsome woman in this room.
Oh, she's the most beautiful of creatures. Overlook her sister there. Do you not find her quite handsome too?
She is tolerable, I suppose. Not to my taste at all. And tell me, why does she sit there slighted by other men? Suggests a fault of temperament, perhaps it's all mine. I see your sister is free, I should chat with her instead.
Oh, Elizabeth, my dear, your father and I were just observing how well Jane and Mr. Bingley appear to be getting along. Can hardly take his eyes off her for a moment. A charming young man, and what a gentleman.
Pity the same can't be said for his companion.
Who, Mr. Darcy?
Pride? Well, he certainly has no cause to take pride in his manners.
Has he upset you, my dearest Elizabeth?
It would take more than the conceited ramblings of a self-opinionated popinjay to upset me, Father.
Conceited ramblings, you say?
Mr. Darcy took pleasure in informing Mr. Bingley, within my earshot, that I was not pretty enough to dance with. Moreover, that there must be something dreadfully wrong with my temperament or my mind, since nobody else appeared to want to dance with me. He must have known I could hear him, or could he be so insensitive to the consequence it did not even occur to him? Either way, it shows a great lack of sensitivity.
Well, fortunately for us, his friend Mr. Bingley does not seem to be cut of the same cloth.
Isn't this a pleasant way to spend an evening?
I couldn't imagine spending it with anyone more lovely than you.
I do not know what to say, except it is very flattering to you think so.
You're the most entrancing of creatures.
I feel the same way. Do you speak like this with every lady?
Oh no, you are quite unique.
You flatter me, Mr. Bingley, although I would be very happy if what you said was true.
Mr. Bingley seems to be paying Jane a lot of attention, I've noticed.
Not jealous, are you?
Of course not, I'm delighted for her.
I'm sure there are many who do not share your delight, namely every other single young lady in Meryton who would rather he be paying some attention to them.
He seems to be very taken for her.
But what man in the right mind would not be?
And what are her feelings for him?
I thought that would be obvious. She likes him very much.
I can't help but feeling that Jane is being too guarded with Mr. Bingley. She should show her feelings more. She should give him more encouragement. She must help him declare his love.
She does as much as her nature will allow. It is not in Jane's nature to secure a husband by design. She is incapable of being other than she is, of acting by calculation. That is the beauty and the wonder of her character, a rare treasure indeed. If Mr. Bingley has not enough sense to perceive that beauty of character, then he does not deserve to have her.
I feel this gathering is in need of livening up. Music is what we need.
Yes, indeed. Elizabeth, do play for us.
Charlotte, you're always asking me to play. Very well then.
Sure it is my turn now.
Very well. Not for too long. Keep it lively.
I've practiced a new concerto.
I think not, my dear.
It's not very long.
It's not the occasion.
Well, then I shall sing instead.
Mary. I do believe a delightful tune on the pianoforte would be much the best idea. Our guests would like to dance.
Isn't this a pleasant way of spending an evening?
Certainly, if one enjoys primitive pleasures. They say that savages are very fond of dancing.
Elizabeth, I enjoyed your song very much, but why aren't you dancing? Mr. Darcy, I represent the most desirable of dancing partners.
Would you care to dance with me, Miss Bennet?
Thank you. No. I assure you, Mr. Bingley, I did not pass this way in order to secure a dancing partner. I've no wish to dance at this moment. And I'm sure Mr. Darcy doesn't either, particularly not with someone whom he was overheard to describe as not pretty enough, nor elevated enough to grace his presence on the dance floor.
If I said something of the kind, then I apologise for my bad manners and lack of perception.
Don't worry, Mr. Darcy. It's of absolutely no consequence to me.
You look somewhat disconcerted. No doubt you are irritated by the company here tonight, by this insipid entertainment and the noise. Oh, the nothingness and yet the self-importance of these people. It's all very tiresome. I would love to hear your strictures on them.
I was not thinking of them.
Well, what were you thinking of?
I was thinking of the curious impact a fine pair of eyes and a lively tongue could have on a man.
Oh, Mr. Darcy, whatever do you mean?
She's a remarkable lady, Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Elizabeth Bennet? I'm astonished.
Astonished? Yes, so am I.
Two days later, on the outskirts of Meryton, Elizabeth and Lydia are watching the soldiers marching by.
Aren't they a wonderful sight?
It's a sight we'll be getting very used to, it seems. I understand the regiment will be camped here for some months at least, if not indefinitely. There's talk that Meryton may become a permanent garrison town.
How delightful. I can't wait to meet an officer. Oh look, there's Isabella. Isabella, my dearest friend, how are you?
Lydia, this is my good friend Mr. Wickham, Lydia Bennet, and this is Lydia's sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth Bennet.
I was wondering why I haven't seen much of you. Now I know why.
There are some things one does not wish to share with friends. However, do not despair. There are plenty of handsome and single officers in the regiment, and their ranks are soon to be swelled by Mr. Wickham here.
Very true. I'm about to join the regiment.
How splendid.
Yes, my dear Lydia, there are officers enough for you and all 5 of your sisters. Although I believe Jane has already met her match.
Oh, you mean Mr. Bingley? Oh, yes, he absolutely dotes on her.
What a splendid catch for her, so handsome and charming.
And so rich.
I think it's a bit early to be considering them a match. There's been no formal proposal as of yet.
Well, I'm sure it's only a matter of time. The problem is, we never have much time to be alone. It's a little opportunity.
I'm sure our dear Mama will hatch some plan to ensure they get the opportunity. acquainted with Mr. Darcy?
I've known Mr. Darcy since boyhood.
Is he your friend?
No, I'm afraid there was very little friendship between us. I was very close to his late father, but I must confess, I find the younger Mr. Darcy a rather disagreeable man.
I think most people see him that way.
Really? Yourself included?
Very much so.
Mr. Wickham, would you like to join us for tea at Longbourn?
I should think so indeed, thank you very much. Will Mr. Darcy be there?
Would it put you off if you knew that he were?
Oh, I'm not afraid of Mr. Darcy, no. Certainly not put me off. Particularly if I might have the pleasure of meeting you again, Miss Bennet. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not being too presumptuous.
Perhaps a little, but I make no objection. After all, we've already established that we have something in common.
So let us hope we establish something in common more positive than a mutual dislike of Mr. Darcy.
Well, we should be off now. We'll see you at the ball, no doubt, if not before.
Well, Elizabeth, you seem to have made a conquest with the dashing Mr. Wickham. It's quite upsetting, really. I was rather hoping you'd pay more attention to me.
Some days later, Mrs. Bennet and Jane were drinking tea when Mr. Bennet entered with 2 letters.
2 letters in one day. One is for you, Jane. I wonder who it's from.
As if we don't know.
It may be confidential.
What confidence can a girl have from her mother? Who's that one from?
Mr. Collins.
That old man. I suppose he wants to come inspect the property to see when he'll inherit when you die.
Maybe that is not exactly what he says.
What exactly does he say?
He says he wishes to make peace with our family, that he regrets the animosity between his late father and myself, and wishes to make amends. The man is clearly a fool.
Damned impertinence. I don't want him here.
I'd see it unwise to turn him away.
I'm invited to dine at Netherfield this evening.
Oh, how splendid. You'll have to go on horseback.
Can't I go in the coach?
No, your father is using the horses for the farm.
I am.
Yes. You'll just have to go on horseback.
But it looks like it might rain.
Well, if the weather gets too bad, they might just have to put you up at Netherfield overnight, and where's the harm in that?
But that seems so calculating.
And what's wrong with a bit of calculation?
However do you think your mother snared me?
I have no wish to snare Mr. Bingley. I want things to happen naturally.
My poor dear, you are so naive, and you, the eldest of my brood, you should know better by now. Will you never learn? No. By horseback you shall go, and you'd better start getting ready.
Later that evening, the Bennets are entertaining some guests.
Pretty melody, Miss Bennet. Almost as pretty as the person playing it.
And those are pretty words. It's no wonder you were so very popular with the ladies.
Popularity is a very transient thing, Miss Bennet, and has no value unless it assists in securing true affection. I'm simply a novelty at the moment, and I'm sure the attentions of the ladies will diminish when that novelty wears off.
It's refreshing to hear such modesty.
I've not the words or the wit to flatter you.
You flatter me, Mr. Wickham.
Lizzie, why do you not play some country dance? Then we could dance. I know I would like to dance. I'm sure Mr. Wickham would.
Is that everybody's wish, Lydia, or merely your own?
I'd be happy to dance with you later, Miss Bennet, but I think your sister deserves a rest from the instrument after the exhilarating performance she has just given.
But I want to dance now.
Unfortunately, my sister has a tendency to believe her wishes are shared by everyone. Later, Lydia.
I think it is very unsocial of you to monopolise Mr. Wickham in this way. Mr. Wickham, I will hold you to your promise of a dance later.
It would be my pleasure.
Refreshments are ready to be served in the parlour. Come along.
Is Mr. Darcy still at Netherfield?
I believe so. He's been there for some months now. I wonder when he'll return to his estate. It's quite a large one, I believe.
Yes, his estate. A very noble one indeed.
Yes, I've heard of it.
It is not quite the noble estate it was once when his father was alive.
I recall you saying you were close to his father.
Indeed I was. His father, the late Mr. Darcy, was one of the greatest men who ever breathed. The truest friend I ever had. He was my godfather, and excessively attached to me, and to my father, who served as a steward to his estate. It saddens me to see how his son has turned out. No man could have been more kind and thoughtful than the late Mr. Darcy. He intended in his will to provide for me amply, and thought he had done. But unfortunately, when he died, the living he intended for me was bestowed on someone else.
But How could his will be disregarded?
Unfortunately, his son, the young Mr. Darcy, you find so disagreeable, chose to doubt it. Perhaps he was jealous of his father's affection for me.
This is shocking. He deserves to be publicly disgraced.
Perhaps one day he shall be, but not by me. My regard for his late father does not permit me to defy or expose him.
Your sentiments do you great honour, Mr. Wickham.
Though let us talk no more of Mr. Darcy, but much rather talk about you.
I have had a message from Netherfield. Seems that Jane has caught a rather bad cold, and the doctor advised she remain at Netherfield for at least a week until she is better. Could have not gone better.
Unless, of course, she dies.
Of course she won't die.
If the doctor is advising bed rest for at least a week, it can hardly be such a trifling complaint. She is hardly likely to be stimulating any company from Mr. Bingley in such a state.
Oh, you always take such a dark view of events.
And you, my dear, always take the view that serves you best.
The following day at Netherfield, Mr. Darcy and Caroline Bingley are drinking tea, when Mr. Bingley greets a slightly bedraggled Miss Bennet.
Good day, Mr. Bingley. My mother informed me that Jane was ill. I've come to see how she is.
Elizabeth, how pleased Jane will be to see you.
How is she?
Rather poorly, I'm afraid. There's something of a fever, but the doctor said she shall recover after a few days' bed rest.
My dear Miss Bennet, have you had an accident? Your dress is so muddy.
I had to walk from Meryton. Our coach and horses were not available.
How unfortunate.
Let me take you up to your sister at once.
Please, excuse me.
Well, she has at least proven herself to be an excellent walker. But how nonsensical of her to be scampering around the country like that, simply because her sister has a cold. Did you see the state of her hair? So untidy.
I thought Miss Bennet looked remarkably well, and I think the concern she has for her sister does her great credit.
Do you? Well, surely this adventure has affected your admiration for her fine eyes.
No, not at all. Her eyes were brightened by the exercise.
Oh, really? I have never heard you talk such nonsense. It's quite ridiculous.
Ridiculous, perhaps, but life presents us with much that is ridiculous. Ridiculous, unexpected, and strange.
Are they ready to go?
They'll be down in a few minutes.
Oh, thank goodness. Having them both here has been simply unendurable.
I thought you liked them, or at least Jane.
Well, she's a sweet girl, and I know you dote on her. But really, Charles, the Bennets are not exactly the type of people who fit in here at Netherfield.
What's wrong with them?
What's wrong with them? Can you really ask such a question?
I rather admire Jane.
It's all very well, my dear friend, but are you sure her feelings are fully reciprocated?
Do you not think they are?
She likes you well enough, but who would not? Whether her feelings run deeper than that, I cannot say. Do you not find her a little reticent?
I never really thought about it. She's modest, to be sure, but...
I think it's quite absurd for you to be entertaining any serious thoughts towards her. She's a charming girl, but her background is totally unsuitable for one such as you. Surely you must see that.
Are you of the same opinion?
I think it's great that your business takes you to London at this juncture. It might help you to see things in a more objective light.
At the Bennet home, Mr. Collins arrives, much to the annoyance of everyone.
I have heard much of the charm and beauty of your daughters, Mrs. Bennet, but in this case fame has fallen far short of the truth.
You are very kind, Mr. Collins, and I wish with all my heart that it may prove to be so, for else they will be destitute enough.
Then I'm sure you shall be glad to hear that since I am to inherit this estate upon the death of your husband, I feel bound to choose a wife from among your daughters.
It's very considerate of you, Mr. Collins. I hope you shall find one of them suitable.
Oh, I'm sure I shall. Why, Jane, as it seems the perfect candidate.
I'm sure Jane would be very, very flattered to hear of this, but unfortunately she is already expecting a proposal from Netherfield.
Ah, I see. And what about Miss Elizabeth?
She has no claims on her at the moment.
Excellent. I'm sure she'll do admirably. It's very important I make the right choice.
Shall I call her now?
Do, as my leave only extends till Saturday.
Elizabeth, my dear, Mr. Collins has something very, very particular he wishes to say to you.
My dear Mamma, I was just about to go for a walk.
Nonsense. I insist you staying and hearing out Mr. Collins. Come, girls.
My dear Elizabeth, I'm sure it will please you to know that I am to ask you to be my companion in life.
Mr. Collins.
Please. And I shall state my reasons for doing so before I am overrun with emotion. One moment. Firstly, I think it necessary that every vicar set a good example of matrimony to his parish. Secondly, I'm sure it would add very greatly to my happiness. Thirdly, it is the advice of my esteemed patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And finally, as I am to inherit this estate upon the death of your father, who may live many a year longer, I feel bound to choose a bride from among his daughters, so that the loss be as little to them on that melancholy day.
You were too hasty, sir. You forget I did not give you an answer, except for the compliment you are paying me. Please forgive me, as I must decline. Mr. Collins, I wish you well, and I assure you that in making me your offer, you've satisfied honour, and may therefore take possession of this estate when the time comes in all good conscience.
Please give me leave to flatter myself, dear cousin, that your refusal is merely words, as we both know you are unlikely to get a better offer.
I assure you, sir, I have no pretension to the kind of elegance which consists of tormenting a respectful man with false refusals.
Oh, you are so charming. I'm sure when sanctioned by the authority of your parents, our union will be a most blessed one.
Good morning. I hope I'm not intruding.
No, Miss Lucas, it's always nice to see one of Miss Bennet's friends. You may be the first to know I have just proposed to Elizabeth.
Proposed?
Yes, she has just left to tell her mother.
And has she accepted your proposal?
Not in so many words, but she would be foolish not to, would she not?
Of course, but I thought that...
Pay no heed to what Lizzie says. I assure you she will be brought to reason. She can be so headstrong and foolish at times.
Headstrong and foolish? Those traits are not very desirable in a wife.
Oh, I only mean she is only so in matters such as these. But I'm sure we can change her mind about your proposal.
You mean she was truly serious in her refusal?
She doesn't know what she's saying. Charlotte, will you please talk some sense into her? I must go find Mr. Bennet.
I'm becoming somewhat perturbed by this turn of events. If she is indeed headstrong and foolish.
Mr. Collins, I hope you're not offended by Lizzie's refusal. I'm sure that she is honoured to have such a fine and distinguished proposal. But what woman would not be?
You are very kind, Miss Lucas, but...
Hear me out. Mr. Collins, I'm sure Lizzie would have accepted your proposal if it were not from the fact she was expecting a proposal from another gentleman.
Another? Who?
His name is George Wickham.
Thank you, Miss Lucas. I just wonder that nobody has taken the trouble to tell me about this Mr. Wickham.
Well, actually, Lizzie hasn't admitted it yet. But as a close friend of hers, it is clear to me that she has feelings for Mr. Wickham. And I'm sure of it that she does.
Headstrong, foolish, and independent too. I've had a rather lucky escape.
My dearest Elizabeth, your mother informs me that unless you marry Mr. Collins, she will never speak to you again.
Oh, Father.
On the other hand, if you do marry Mr. Collins, I will never speak to you again.
Oh, Father!
So you see, you face a rather unhappy alternative either way.
Oh, Father!
How can you say this? You promised you would insist she'd marry Mr. Collins.
My dear, I ask of you 2 favours. Firstly, you allow me to use my understanding of this situation. And secondly, the use of this room, undisturbed. I'm about to settle down to a very good book.
Jane, I can't get any sense out of anybody. Can you please talk to her? What's the matter? Why do you look so... Who's the letter from?
It's from Caroline Bingley. She says she does not expect her brother to return to Netherfield.
Not return? Something happened.
She says he's seeing a lot of Georgiana Darcy.
Mr. Darcy's sister.
Who, according to Caroline, is without equal for beauty, grace, and accomplishment. She says it will not be long before her brother becomes engaged to Miss Darcy.
I cannot believe this. Oh, the wickedness of it all. How could Mr. Bingley be so deceitful? Can this really be true?
It is Caroline Bingley who is being deceitful. It is simply wishful thinking on her part. My dear Jane, nobody who has seen you and Mr. Bingley together could doubt his affection for you.
Yes, Yes, he loves you, I am sure of it. You must go to London at once.
No, there has simply been an error of fancy on my part. Caroline and her brother have known Miss Darcy far longer than me, so it is no wonder they love her better. I have no reproof against either of them.
Jane, you mustn't give up. You must go to him. Speak to him.
I'm a little tired now. Please excuse me.
Jane, my dear... Well, this is unbearable. Unbearable. I think I shall go mad. At least Jane has the excuse that none of this was her doing, but you. How could you possibly think to turn down a man such as Mr. Collins? You must go to him at once, and...
As I say, all's well that ends well. My dear Elizabeth, you should have told me about this Mr. Wickham sooner.
Mr. Wickham.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was supposed to keep it a secret, but surely you must have known that Elizabeth was expecting a proposal from a Mr. Wickham?
Elizabeth and Mr. Wickham. Has everyone gone mad? Why, it was only today I heard that Mr. Wickham had become engaged to a Miss King, the one whose father died and left her £10,000.
Oh, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry.
There's no need. I never said I was in love with Mr. Wickham.
Of course you weren't in love with Mr. Wickham. How could you be in love with someone with so few prospects in life?
And how could I blame a man in such an unfortunate position as Mr. Wickham if he seeks someone with more prospects than I have to offer?
This is all rather confusing, but as I say, all's well that ends well. My dear Miss Lucas and I are on our way to see her father to discuss the prospect of our future together. Yes, Miss Lucas and I are to be married.
Mr. Bennet meets with his brother, Charles.
So, Elizabeth is at the Rosings vicarage with Charlotte and new husband?
Yes, she's been there for almost a week now. You'd think that with so many other women in this house, her absence would almost go unnoticed by me. But I do miss her. Oh, Charles, she has the liveliest mind of any woman I know, and is the only one of all 5 of my daughters with whom I can really have a stimulating conversation with. I dread to think of the day she gets married. I know one shouldn't be so dependent on a daughter for one's comfort, but I simply cannot help myself. She leaves such a great big void in the house when she's not around.
Well, I'm afraid you may have to suffer another parting from the dear girl before too long. It's my intention to invite her to excursion to the Lake District this summer.
I'd like to offer grounds for an objection, but I can think of none. It seems I simply must just grin and bear it. I dare say it will do her good.
I'm surprised she was invited to the vicarage after rejecting Mr. Collins' proposal. I'm even more surprised she accepted the invitation.
Yes, Charlotte insisted on it. She and Elizabeth have been friends for quite some years now. And no doubt the new Mrs. Collins needs Elizabeth there to relieve the tedium of being married to Mr. Collins. Elizabeth writes that they are to visit Lady Catherine de Bourgh this Saturday.
At the Rosings garden, Elizabeth, Charlotte, and Mr. Collins are shown into the drawing room, where they are greeted by Lady de Bourgh and her daughter Anne, a spiritless young woman.
It is very good of you to invite us all, Lady Catherine. We are deeply honoured by your condescension. Elizabeth, this is Lady Catherine and her daughter Anne.
Go. Enjoy the outer gardens, Mr. Collins. Your wife looks as though she could use the exercise. So, Miss Bennet, you reside at Meryton at the future estate of Mr. Collins. Did you have the privilege of meeting my nephew while he was there?
Your nephew?
Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, master of the Pemberley estate. I believe he stayed with his friend Mr. Bingley some months ago at Netherfield.
Oh, yes. I did not realise he was your nephew, although now I can see the resemblance in your character.
Oh, you do us both great honour, Miss Bennet. He's a fine young man, is he not?
He sure made a deep impression on all at Meryton.
I'm sure he did. There are few equal to his measure. Many young ladies I know are eager to catch his eye, but he disdains them all. For with but one exception, he is yet to meet a woman good enough for him.
One exception. Who might that be?
Why, my daughter Anne, of course. In matters of taste, education, and breeding, they are as one.
I'm sure of it.
My daughter is very accomplished, but unfortunately ill health prevents her from displaying her talents too robustly.
I'm sorry to hear it.
Oh, I'm sure if her voice was strong enough, she would have made a delightful soprano. Do you sing, Miss Bennet?
A little.
And your sisters, I believe you are one of 5. Do any of them play or sing?
One of them does.
Only one of them? All should have learned. if I had learnt I would have been a great prodigy, as would have Anne if her help had allowed it. I'm confident she would have performed delightfully. And as for drawing, if she had the strength to attend the easel, she would have made a beautiful exponent in form and colour. Do you draw, Miss Bennet?
No, not at all.
But surely your governess gave you instruction in drawing.
We never had a governess.
No governess? In a house of 5 girls? Why, I've never heard of such a thing. Your education must have been sorely neglected.
Not really.
Oh, nonsense. Ah, my dearest nephew.
Aunt Catherine, Anne, did not expect to see you here, Miss Bennet.
I did not expect to see you here either.
Come along. We shall see if tea is ready, Anne.
Are you and your family well?
Quite well, thank you. We were all quite surprised when you all quit Netherfield so suddenly last November, so soon after Mr. Bingley's departure. He and his sister are well, I hope. When you left London.
Perfectly so, thank you.
And is Mr. Bingley planning on returning to Netherfield?
I cannot say, but I should not be surprised if he were to sell Netherfield should a suitable offer arise.
I see. Perhaps sometime you could inform me as to Mr. Bingley's sudden loss in Netherfield and his friends at Meryton.
When you say friends, I presume you're talking about your sister Jane.
His manners of breaking off associations with my sister was inconsiderate, to say the least.
Inconsiderate, perhaps, but anyone observing your sister and Mr. Bingley's relationship would know that her feelings did not run deep. He did what any gentleman would do in the circumstances.
And was that your view in the situation between them?
Her indifference was there for everyone to see. It was not I alone who detected it.
I'm sure you had support in this opinion from Caroline Bingley, no doubt.
I rely on my own observations, Miss Bennet.
Those who hold an opinion should be very sure of their judgment in the first place. And in this instance, as perhaps in other instances, your opinion is mistaken.
On the road outside Meryton, Lydia was walking when she encountered Mr. Wickham.
Miss Bennet, what a pleasure to see you again.
Mr. Wickham? And how is Miss King?
Miss King, I'm not sure. I haven't seen her for some time.
But I thought you were to be married.
We were briefly engaged, but alas, it was not to be.
How unfortunate.
Unfortunate? For whom? For her? I think not. I believe we both had a lucky escape.
Is there anyone else in your life?
Anyone special, you mean? No, I'm quite free. What about you, Miss Bennet? Do you still have all the officers chasing after you?
There is no one at the moment.
And we are both free. How splendid. May I ask, what did you plan for this evening?
Nothing in particular.
I cannot help feeling that fate has brought us here together today.
Do you really think so?
I do indeed. Why, only last night I was thinking about you, and suddenly, here you are.
You were thinking about me.
To tell you the truth, I've thought about you a great deal.
Meanwhile, at the Rosings garden, Elizabeth is sitting alone, reading a book.
Mr. Darcy, I'm afraid Mr. Collins and his wife are not here at the moment.
I know. It's you I've come to see, Miss Bennet.
Me? What business could you have with me, Mr. Darcy?
I've been waiting some time for an opportunity to speak to you alone, Miss Bennet. Since that time I heard you play and sing at the piano, when you upbraided me for my discourtesy at the ball. I found my thoughts returning to you constantly, and when I looked into your eyes, they affected me in a way that I've never been affected before. And when I saw you staying at Netherfield, tending your sister's illness with such devotion and consideration, I found myself warm with you even more.
Mr. Darcy, you astonished me with these declarations. I had no idea.
I've tried to keep it hidden. I've always despised the kind of love sickness that allows men to make fools of themselves and forget their duties and station in life. Even saying this now goes against my better judgment. But I fear it's no longer my power to resist. In spite of your inferior background and your family's embarrassing behaviour in polite society, I can no longer deny my feelings for you. I do not understand why you think so ill of me, Miss Bennet.
I have every reason in the world to think ill of you. Your treatment towards Mr. Wickham was enough to decide me against you. And then you ruin the happiness of my most beloved sister by helping to turn Mr. Bingley against her. You cannot deny that you, with the help of Caroline Bingley, have been the principal means to driving them apart.
I will not deny that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister. Not only was her background unsuited to him, it was also apparent from my observations that her feelings were at best superficial. So I don't think I've saved anyone's chances of happiness but my own. Quite the contrary, I think. I helped save them a lot of unhappiness.
You could not be more wrong. Because you were unable to see the delicacy of my sister's feelings simply shows what an insensitive and unperceptive man you are. And it was obvious that Mr. Bingley's regard was equally as strong.
If it was so strong, do you think I could have turned him away from her?
If you had told him he had mistaken my sister's regard for him, then yes, he would have listened to you, his so-called friend. And being the gentleman that he is, he would have desisted from forcing his intentions where he felt they were not entirely welcomed. The devious and unprincipled can play havoc with people's sentiments when it pleases them. And this, I think, is exactly what you've done.
You may think of me as you wish, Miss Bennet, but I will not accept your description of me as devious and unprincipled. Whatever you may think, I acted in the best of motives, and if I was wrong in the premise of my actions, then I deeply regret it. But it was not for a lack of principle.
And what do you call your treatment towards Mr. Wickham? Is that an example of your principles?
I do not wish to discuss Mr. Wickham.
No, I'm sure you don't. For how in the name of friendship can you defend yourself there?
I shall tell you something that I've told few people. The position that Mr. Collins now holds in the church is the position that my father had originally attended for Mr. Wickham.
Mr. Wickham? In the church?
You see, you find it as hard to conceive as I've always found it, but indeed after my father's death 5 years ago, Mr. Collins told me he had no wish to take orders in the church and would prefer to study law. I settled £3,000 for this purpose, and he resigned all assistance from the church.
Go on.
For 3 years I did not hear from him. He said he had lost the money in a business venture. I later discovered that he had lost the money gambling. He came to ask me another £1,000, and I gave it to him in an agreement that he would not bother me or my family again. But indeed he came asking for money again, having quickly frittered the 1,000 that I'd just given him, and when I refused he went straight for my sister, a sweet, innocent and a trusting girl who was just then 15 years old. And he succeeded in persuading my sister, Georgiana Darcy, that she was in love with him.
And how do you know his feelings for her were not genuine?
Because Mr. Wickham has never displayed interest in a woman where there has not been a fortune to be. But I can see I'm wasting my breath on you, Miss Bennet. If you will insist on doubting me, then perhaps nothing can persuade you. I am indeed sorry if I troubled you with my offensive proposal, and I assure you to cause you no further offence. Good day.
At the Pemberley estate, Charles is in conversation with Mr. Darcy's housekeeper, followed by Elizabeth.
You've heard so much about the Pemberley estate. Thank you for showing us around. It is indeed very grand. You are very fortunate to be a housekeeper in such a place.
I am indeed, and I'm particularly fortunate in having the best master one could wish for.
Do you mean Mr. Darcy?
Who else could I mean?
I do not wish to be discourteous, but I've always known Mr. Darcy to be a man of rather sullen disposition.
Mr. Darcy? Never. Those who believe so are those who do not know him well.
Well, it seems I've misjudged Mr. Darcy.
I'm very gratified to hear that, Miss Bennet.
Mr. Darcy, my aunt and uncle didn't know you would be here. They said you'd be here tomorrow. They insisted on visiting Pemberley as we were passing so close on our travels. If I'd known you'd be here, I would not have come. I do not wish to embarrass you.
Your presence here does not embarrass me, Miss Bennet. I'm honoured.
That is very gracious of you, Mr. Darcy.
To tell the truth, I came a day early because I heard that you were in the area, and I was hoping to see you.
Mr. Darcy?
No, Miss Bennet. Listen, some months ago I took the time to tell you that...
I'm very sorry to intrude, my lady, but there is a very urgent communication for you.
Bad news, I'm afraid. My sister Lydia has disappeared with George Wickham. The commander of the regiment, Colonel Foster, found a note to say that they'd eloped to Scotland to marry, but has traced them no further than London. He thinks that Wickham does not really intend to marry Lydia, and that the real reason that he has disappeared is because he has found himself in debt and simply brought Lydia along with him for his own amusement.
How could I have been so stupid? I should have exposed Mr. Wickham for what he was. If it weren't for my silly pride, none of this would have happened.
My father has gone to London to see if he can find them. I must return at once.
I'll join your father in London and help in the search.
Is there anything I can do, Miss Bennet? I feel partly to blame.
I do not see how you can be of any help in this instance, and I do not see how you could blame yourself for my sister's impetuous behavior. Even if she had been warned against Mr. Wickham, I do not think it would have changed the outcome. My sister has always been easily swayed by gentlemanly charm.
A week later at Longbourn, Mrs. Bennet is very distressed, and Mr. Bennet has just returned from London.
We have found them. We have seen and spoken with them both.
Thank God. Are they married?
No. I agree with Colonel Foster's assessment of the situation. I do not believe that Mr. Wickham has any intention of marrying Lydia.
He must. Otherwise we shall be ruined. What will become of us? I think I shall go mad.
Calm yourself. There seems to be a solution on offer. My brother is discussing the details with them now. It seems that Mr. Wickham would be willing to marry Lydia if a small allowance is made within the marriage. To be precise, the sum of £100 a year, plus commission in another regiment.
But we cannot afford £100 a year.
My brother has offered to help. It seems a very reasonable price to pay for saving our family's name.
Yes, anything to save the family name. Who's that from?
Mr. Collins. He says...
I wish to give you my condolences for your grievous affliction. The death of your daughter will be a blessing in comparison to this. I am of the opinion that it stems from too much indulgence, though for the condolences of yourself and Mrs. Bennet, I am inclined to think that Lydia's disposition was naturally bad. I am shared in this sentiment by Lady Catherine de Bourgh, her daughter Anne, and the new Mrs. Collins, to whom I have related details of the affair. May I conclude this letter by saying how grateful I am to Miss Elizabeth Bennet for refusing my proposal and thus sparing me from involvement in this unpleasant business.
Now everyone will know. We are ruined. Ruined.
What if we can get Lydia and Wickham married?
To have my Lydia married to such a wicked man.
I find Mr. Wickham quite amusing, really. I would not object to having him as a son-in-law, if we could afford him. At least he is not dull. Besides, I thought you found him pleasant.
Well, that was before he ran off with our daughter. He is not good enough for her.
I think they suit each other rather well. Let's be realistic, my dear. Our Lydia has always been something of an adventuress herself. Who would be more suited to her than a real adventurer?
Some days later at Longbourn, Kitty is gazing out the window when she turns to her sisters.
They're here. Can it really be 2 months since you went away? It seems but a fortnight, and yet so much has happened. Do the people hereabouts know I'm married today? I want to show everybody my ring and what a handsome and charming husband I have acquired. All my friends will envy me. When we're in Scotland, you must come visit us often. There will be no shortage of handsome officers. I will find husbands for all of my sisters. Elizabeth, I was meaning to talk to you about... Well, I know you once harbored some feelings for Mr. Wickham, and I wasn't...
My dear Lydia, you need have no qualms on my behalf. You are welcome to Mr. Wickham. I hope you'll be very happy.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Did you know we almost had to postpone it last minute?
Why? Was Mr. Wickham having second thoughts?
No, of course not. It was just our dear uncle who was supposed to have given us away was called away on urgent business. But luckily Mr. Darcy agreed to stand in for him.
Mr. Darcy?
Yes, he escorted Mr. Wickham to the church. Lizzie, I just remember Mr. Darcy swore to secrecy. You have to promise not to tell anybody I told you.
Your secret's safe with me. Mr. Darcy escorting Mr. Wickham. How could this be? Unless...
Later in Longbourn, Mr. Bingley arrives.
Hello, Jane. Your mother told me I might find you here.
Mr. Bingley, have you returned to Netherfield?
Yes. Good.
It's a long time, Mr. Bingley, since you went away. People said you would not return, but I always hoped it was not true.
My dearest Jane, I don't know where to begin.
In the Bennet's drawing room, Lady de Bourgh shows herself in, unexpectedly in a foul mood.
Lady Catherine.
Miss Bennet, I hope you're well. This lady, I suppose, is your mother?
Yes, I am. And these are my daughters, Mary and Kitty.
You have a very small park here.
Well, it is smaller than Rosings, of course, but quite a bit bigger than Sir William Lucas's.
Goodness, this must be the most inconvenient of living rooms during summer evenings. All of the windows are facing west.
We never sit in here after dinner.
Indeed. Mrs. Bennet, I wonder if I may have a word in private with your daughter Elizabeth?
Elizabeth? Well, of course, if you wish. Come, girls.
Miss Bennet, I shall come straight to the point. A report reached me some days ago that not only was your sister to be advantageously married, but that you, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, would in all likelihood soon afterwards be united with my own nephew, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Really? And from whom did you hear this report?
That is of no consequence to you, particularly as I know it to be a scandalous falsehood.
Then why are you here?
For the sake of propriety, I insist you tell me there is no foundation to this report.
But your ladyship has already declared it to be false.
It must be so. It ought to be so, for as long as my nephew has use of his reason, though your arts and allurements may, in a moment of weakness, have persuaded him otherwise.
If so, I would be the last to confess it.
Miss Bennet, I am not accustomed to being crossed. As Mr. Darcy's nearest relative, I'm entitled to know his dearest concerns.
But you are not entitled to mine.
Did you know Mr. Darcy is to be married to my daughter Anne?
Your daughter?
Precisely. So, Miss Bennet, what have you to say to that?
Only this. If he is married to your daughter, then you have no reason to suppose he would make an offer to me.
Their engagement is of a different kind. Right from infancy they were intended for each other. It was his mother's best wish, as well as mine.
And has Mr. Darcy agreed to this?
Not in so many words, but he knows where his duty lies.
But if Mr. Darcy feels he is not by honour, nor inclination, nor even duty bound to your daughter, then he is free to make his own choice. And if I am that choice, why should I not accept him?
Because honour, decency, and decorum forbid it. You are of inferior birth and are wholly unacceptable to the family. Nor does it in your own interest, Miss Bennet. Yes, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, your own interests forbid it, for you shall be shunned by all his friends and family.
If so, Mr. Darcy would be the first to realise it. And if it does not bother him, why should it bother me?
Perhaps he is not yet aware of your sister's infamous elopement. If he is not yet aware, I shall make him aware.
I believe he has already been made aware of it.
And is he to have such a girl as his sister? In God's name, what could you be thinking? Is the name of Darcy in the estate of Pemberley to be tainted forever? You must promise me at once you will never enter into an engagement with him.
Do you really think a promise from me will send him into the arms of your daughter? You must be terribly naive and foolish to believe that.
How dare you, Miss Bennet! You are trying my patience.
And you are trying mine.
Some days later at Longbourn, Mrs. Bennet is looking out the window. Jane and Lydia are standing round the piano listening to Kitty play.
Oh, look, Jane, here comes Mr. Bingley. Oh, and he's a friend with him. Ugh, that dreadful Mr. Darcy. What on earth can he want with us, such an unpleasant man?
He's not really so unpleasant once you get to know him, Mama. He used to be rather proud and aloof when we first met. But he's become much more cordial as of late. I understand he's been very kind to my uncle.
Well, he makes me very uncomfortable. But, as he is Mr. Bingley's friend, I suppose I'll just have to put up with him.
Good day, Mrs. Bennet. I believe that I have some business I wish to discuss with your daughter. Elizabeth, is she here?
I think so. I shall see. Though what business you can have with Elizabeth, I have no idea.
Mr. Darcy, I was not expecting you to call.
I hope my visit is not unwelcome.
On the contrary, I've been awaiting an opportunity to express my gratitude to you for what you've done for Lydia.
Lydia?
I know it was supposed to be a secret, but my sister has never been very good at holding her tongue. I know how you arranged her marriage and gave Wickham a commission to force him into it.
I regret that you should know about it. I didn't wish to cause you any uneasiness.
And you've caused none. I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Darcy.
Elizabeth, When I heard what you said to Lady Catherine, how you refused to promise her that you would not marry me, it brought me to hope, as I'd scarcely allowed myself to hope before.
Yes, you know enough of my frankness to believe me capable of that. Having abused you so abominably to your face, I would have shrunk from abusing you to Lady Catherine's. I just hope you can forgive me for all the appalling things I said to you the day I rejected your proposal.
It was nothing I did not deserve. My behaviour to you at the time was unpardonable. You had every right to point it out.
Let us not fight for the largest share of the blame, Mr. Darcy.
What is the meaning of this, Mr. Darcy? I am surprised at you. And you, Elizabeth, behaving in such an intimate manner with no sense of decorum.
There are some things that override decorum, Mamma, as Mr. Darcy and I have now discovered.
Forgive us for startling you, Miss Bennet. Though I should tell you I was not being disrespectful to your daughter. The fact is I've asked her to be my wife.
You marry Elizabeth. Well, Elizabeth, what have you to say to this?
I would be very honoured to marry Mr. Darcy, as I could not think of someone who could do me greater honour in such a proposal.
Yes. Well, I'm sure Mr. Darcy would make a splendid husband. I have always admired you, Mr. Darcy. You're handsome and charming in such a noble estate. We are very flattered and honoured.
Thank you, Mrs. Bennet. Perhaps I might discuss with Mr. Bennet.
Of course, but I can be sure he can have no objection.
May I speak with him first? It might be better if I do.
Yes. Would you care to accompany me, Mr. Darcy?
My dearest Elizabeth, your mother informs me that you and Mr. Darcy wish to marry.
Yes, Father.
Well, I am absolutely flabbergasted. My dearest girl, I cannot think of a man less suited to you.
Mr. Darcy and I are ideally suited. I was once prejudiced against him, just as you are, but he is a man much misunderstood. I should not be telling you this, but it might help you see him in a better light, to know that it was Mr. Darcy who saved this family from disgrace. It was he who forced Mr. Wickham's hand, who settled Wickham's debts, got him a new commission, and gave him an allowance.
I thought my brother had provided for that.
No, he was sworn to secrecy by Mr. Darcy, who did not wish to secure anyone's gratitude for his action, least of all, mine.
It's enough to shake one's faith in human nature. Such selfless behaviour makes me feel uncomfortable. I have always based my trust in people on a basis of their self-interest, and I would much rather be dealing with someone as nakedly selfish as our dearest Mr. Wickham, who I always feel shall forever be my favourite son-in-law. Yet, if it's Mr. Darcy you wish to marry, I shall not stand in your way. But, my dearest Elizabeth, you have no idea how much I'm going to miss you.